I don't think anyone is unaware of the grotesque and the growing gap between those who own huge wealth and those who live in poverty. What I find frustrating and very odd is that although we have identified the fact that the richest 1% own half the world's wealth, and we have identified the fact that 3.5 billion people have assets of less than $10,000, we do not identify a further crucial identifier, which is that the richest people in the world are men, and the poorest are women. Now, that last report came out in November last year. There was another report that came out in November last year by the World Bank and UN Women, and that had analysed household survey data for 89 countries by sex, by age, by household composition, and other variables. And again, it found that more women than men live in poverty. It found that households with children were among the poorest, and that single parents with children, and predominantly single mothers with children, which are the vast majority of single parents, face a far higher risk of poverty. So UN Women stated that the policy implications of its findings were very clear, that eradicating poverty was going to require greater attention to the vulnerabilities faced by women during specific periods of their lives. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 1 is ending poverty. Gender equality is goal number 5. Meanwhile, here in Britain, a new report last week identified that 14 million people are now living in poverty. That includes 4.5 million UK children. The survey was described in one newspaper as the most sophisticated analysis yet of material disadvantage in the UK. The most significant innovation being to build core living costs such as childcare into its poverty measure. The survey found that poverty is especially prevalent in families with at least one disabled person, households where no one works, or that are dependent on income on irregular or 0 hours jobs, and in single parent families. Now, this study comes 10 years after austerity was first introduced. It comes 1 year after research by the House of Commons Library showed that women were bearing 86% of the austerity burden. That study showed that in cutting social security, on which women disproportionately rely, because of the societal pressures that push more women than men into unpaid care roles, in addition with cutting investment in care, on which women disproportionately rely for the same reason, the government had essentially funded its austerity programme by taking money out of poor women's purses to create tax breaks for the rich. And the rich, as we know, are disproportionately men. So 2 things are clear to me. The first is that an economic model that recognises the lived experience of women would tackle poverty far better than existing ones. And the second thing that is very clear to me is that not using the right models is not the biggest problem here. The biggest problem is that there is a huge reluctance to acknowledge that any change in approach is needed. After 10 years of austerity that hit women disproportionately, why are we still not talking about the fact that rising poverty levels and inequality is deeply rooted in women's inequality, and that solving women's inequality would make life better for everyone? With all the work that the World Bank and the United Nations are doing to tackle poverty, and as it repeatedly throws up data showing that women experience it disproportionately, why are we still not prioritizing women's equality as the route to ending poverty? Before I did this job, it's a funny sort of job. It feels odd describing it as a job. But before I did this job, I used to work for Reuters news agency. And I worked there for about 20 years. And I covered everything from stock markets to currency markets to oil markets, economics to politics to trade, technology, diplomacy, foreign affairs. I did all sorts of stuff. And the first thing I noticed, most quickly of all as a rookie reporter, although it was subsequently borne out by years of financial reporting and editing, was how quickly investors move when there's a chance of making money on the next big thing. It basically all comes down to fear and greed. And all it would take would be one report from one of the big investment banks or the professional services organizations, and whoosh, they'd be off. There'd be a stampede. Either the rush to buy rubles, oh, remember those days, the technology bubble, the endless ups and downs of the oil price, the stampede to Brazil, the stampede to China. By stark contrast, a raft of analyses from PricewaterhouseCoopers to Grant Thornton to McKinsey to Barclays to the EIB, all showing that women's equality could add billions to countries' GDP and companies' profits, was met by deadly silence. Tumbleweed. We have ignored women for so long that even when their experience is shown to be at the heart of the biggest problems confronting modern society, we will look away from an effective resolution rather than look directly at women. We have to see women. And to do that, we have to stop seeing them as a special interest group, a subsection of real life, a thinner version of the male experience. The reason we set up the Women's Equality Party was to show, first of all, that solving inequality requires women-specific policies. And then also to show that it is actually possible to design for women in a way that benefits everyone, that embracing difference benefits everyone, that exposing the flaws of existing designs is necessary for the advancement of all in society, that putting the furthest first, because the poorest and the most marginalized are always women, forces us to go beyond the limitations of the current binary, socialism or conservatism. That feminism is a political ideology in and of itself. We have to challenge the idea that feminism belongs to all the other parties to claim as they see fit, as a secondary consideration to more important things. And in particular, we have to challenge ideas about identity politics, about whose identities we are considering in current politics. Now, you can see by the sort of little ripple that went through, like there really is nothing so derided in the marketplace of political ideas as identity politics. It is a term that immediately conjures a cult of the humorless, arbiters of offense who shut down imaginative debate in the name of esoteric special interests. This powerful narrative is rooted even in the dictionary definition of identity politics, which goes, a tendency for people of a particular religion, race, social background, etc., to form exclusive political alliances, moving away from traditional broad-based party politics. Now, I think it's astonishing that anyone still thinks politics is broadly for everyone, particularly in the age of Trump and Farage and their assault on the liberal elite.
For more debates, talks and interviews, Subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.